I love my wife Lena to the moon and back, and with each year that passes, I become more and more convinced that she's my person and that I made the right decision to marry her. But oh my god, does she say some messed up stuff when she's asleep? She told me she's a sleep talker on our third or fourth date, pretty early on in our relationship anyway, and obviously I didn't hear any of it until we started having sleepovers. It wasn't even that bad when I first heard it either, just dumb stuff, and I actually had a lot of fun having these bizarre sleep conversations with her, because if you responded to some of the stuff she'd come out with, she'd keep on talking like her subconscious had taken over. For example, one time when she was asleep and I was drifting off, she just said the name Brian. I'm like, who's Brian? And she just responds with, Brian's coming out of the faucet. I laughed so hard it actually woke her up, and when I told her what she said, she rolled over in embarrassment with a stop laughing at me. But then, as the years went by, she started coming out with this stuff that wasn't nearly as funny as the Brian thing, and then it got to be stuff that was honestly downright frightening. One time, I got up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom. I did my business, walked back into the bedroom, then turned off the lamp on the bedside table as I climbed back into bed. Then, in the pitch darkness, my wife says, "It was following you." I actually felt the hairs of my arms and neck stand up on end as I asked her, what was following me? But my question was greeted by silence. Sitting in the dark, imagining some creature having been following me in total silence, that was one of the creepiest moments of our whole marriage, and it wasn't even the only one. And this other time, I ended up staying up to binge watch the first few episodes of that Better Call Saul show. I try my best to stay as quiet as possible, then, just as I'm about to turn off the light, I actually thought that she was awake because she says, "Leave it on." I reply to her in all seriousness saying, "Leave it on? Why?" To which she responds, "Because I need it to see." I thought she might have been reading, but I lean over the bed to see that she's not reading, and she's not even awake. I then ask her again, "Leave what on?" And she says, "My head." That one was so creepy that I ended up running my hand down my face while half laughing, just blown away by how creepy some of her sleep talking was. I don't know what kind of horror movie dream she was having, but I'm glad it was her dreaming it and not me. Then there was the time that I woke up in the middle of the night with a mouth drier than the Mojave. I rolled out of bed as quietly as I can, and then, right as I'm doing so, I just hear Lena say, "Can you see it?" I just freeze, primed for another one of her creepy sleep-talking moments, and I ask, "See what?" She then replies, "It's over in the corner." Now, bearing in mind, the corners of the room are in complete darkness, and as much as I was well accustomed to my wife's creepy nocturnal outbursts, I found myself extremely anxious as I reached for the bedside lamp. Then click. When the light came on, there was nothing there. I found myself just shaking my head, still amazed at how she had this absolute talent for saying the most unnerving things, even though she wasn't even awake. Most are really innocent things too, apart from the head comment, like she'll be dreaming about a freaking kitty cat or something, but in my head, it's some spawn of Satan just sat there in the corner, watching me with beady, black eyes in the darkness. You think I'd get used to it after a while, and I kind of have. Not everything she says is super creepy, like I said. Some of it's kind of hilarious too. But good God, the timing of some of the things she says. It's like the sleeping version of her should write horror movie scripts or something, because even after all these years, she still has a way of seriously giving me the creeps with their sleep talking. In late 2020, I was working at a chain hotel off the interstate. I won't say which hotel, but it's a major brand. I was training a coworker for the night audit shift. She and I are both females in our mid-20s. Around 3 a.m., after all the paperwork for the day was done, I decided to show her the different room types, starting with the largest suite up on the 3rd floor. Upon arriving on the 3rd floor, we got off the elevator, started walking down the hall, and noticed a man who was sweating profusely just standing in the doorway of his room. He definitely seemed intoxicated at the very least. We walked by him, greeted him, as one does, and get no response. The fear was subtly palpable. We get to the suite that I'm showing her, and as soon as the door shuts, I say that guy is giving me a weird vibe. I don't think we should walk past him again to get back to the elevator and suggest that we instead continue down the hall to the stairs. As soon as we exit the room, we immediately notice the man is not only not back in his room, but facing and watching us. I whisper to her, "Girl, take your shoes off. We're going to run down the steps and into the parking lot, okay?" She agrees, and we take our shoes off at the top of the stairwell and bolt down the steps and out into the parking lot. We enter back into the building and run to the office and check the cameras. Sure enough, that man had followed us down the steps and was now looking for us in the hallway and by the door of the parking lot. We check the reservation tied to the room number so I can inform my manager and tell them to place this person on the do not rent list. All I remember was that his name was extraordinarily normal, so forgettable that it was something like John Smith. But jump forward to late 2021 and I turn on the local news and see this man who followed us down the steps that night. His name was Anthony Robinson, now dubbed the shopping cart killer, who killed 2 women in Harrisonburg and 2 more that we know of in Northern Virginia. He is known to have utilized hotels to meet and then victimize women he was communicating with online. This was my only close encounter and definitely very creepy in hindsight. When I, a female, was 15, I became friends with this girl that we'll call Allie. We ended up becoming more than friends, but our relationship was sweet and pretty innocent. Her family was middle class and lived in a suburban neighborhood. She got along with her parents, but the whole family dynamic was just a bit odd to me. She had one slightly older sister. Her parents were older than most of our friend group, like approaching 60 years old, and her dad used to be a pastor or something, some very religious career, and had a lot to say about the Bible and such, which is why we were afraid to tell him that we were in a gay relationship, and we just acted like we were besties. I remember early on, Allie telling me how they got kicked out of the church because of some very insane lies and rumors, as she put it, and that CPS was called and is still an issue. I was confused, but it made her angry to talk about, so I didn't press it further. She seemed to believe none of it was based in reality, and that was the first weird thing. They didn't allow her to have her door closed, especially when she had friends over, but the house was empty most of the time. One day we were changing into swimsuits or something and turned away from each other. I was facing a mirror and I saw her dad peeking through the open door at us. We were both nude. I froze and pretended I didn't see him and hoped that he'd go away. Then he was gone and I never said anything. At the time I thought it must have just been an accident somehow, like he was just checking on us and didn't mean to see us like that. I don't know. Then Allie would tell me about these strange women who would come over and disappear into her parents' room for hours. Once her dad came back into the kitchen covered in sweat with a camera around his neck. Again, these people were middle-class white Christians, so it was really confusing. Once he came in the room after me and Allie had a sleepover and she had gotten up to get ready for whatever. He sat with me on the bed and basically said that being gay is okay because I can't get his daughter pregnant and that it's a sin, but all sin is the same, and that I might as well because we're all forgiven in the end, so nothing matters. I thought that was incredibly jarring at the time. I didn't know how he knew because we were only affectionate in private and even pretended to like boys. We never talked about it again. We ended up breaking up at age 17. There must have been more little weird things, but those are the main ones I remember. I don't know what I'm looking for posting it here, it's just I kind of wanted to get off my chest. I'm still just very confused about all of it. When I was 8 years old, my family moved into a lower income part of town. The good thing about it was my aunt, my mom's sister, and older brother on my dad's side lived in the same neighborhood as us. There was an old small building from what I'm told was a church. I used to come there to play a lot as I didn't have many friends. My father kept my family isolated the majority of my life. There was a girl who used to always come and play with me, and before you ask, she was not a ghost. Her name was Henrietta. I always liked Henrietta, we always played together. She was like the best friend I'd ever had, considering I hadn't had any. Henrietta's family stayed about 2 houses down from an older man named Mr. Herbert. I'd say maybe he was in his early 40s during the time. He was always very creepy looking to me. He would always stare at me and Henrietta through his bushes, or he'd be peeking out the windows at us. Mr. Herbert gave me the worst feeling ever. He used to tell Henrietta not to talk to him because he seemed like he was kind of weird. But she always as a child tried to see the good in people. But I just couldn't shake the feeling of something sinister about him. I remember one night looking out my bedroom window and seeing him across the street in the bushes, just staring at my house. I closed the curtain for what seemed like 10 minutes, and when I opened the curtains back up, he was walking through the field back to his house. The next morning, the police were everywhere. It seems like Henrietta had went missing, and no one could find her. I remember her parents being really hysterical about it because Henrietta was their only child. Because I was her friend at the time, the police, along with my parents, went to the station and I told them I'd last seen Henrietta at the old church we played at. I was heading home and she said that she was waiting on a great friend to come by with candy. I had no clue who she was talking about, but I did mention the creepy neighbor, Mr. Herbert, how he was always following us and staring at us and had made some comments about her body from time to time. My parents told me to stop telling stories, as they called it. Anyways, they apparently ruled Mr. Herbert out as a suspect in her disappearance. And Henrietta never came home again. Mr. Herbert skipped town about 6 months later, and there was still no Henrietta. It's been 24 years now since her disappearance. One day I cut on the news in our town, and lo and behold, Mr. Herbert, who was much older, was on there. Apparently the police came up with testing and found new evidence that was overlooked that linked to Mr. Herbert. They found Henrietta's body, or dismembered parts, I should say, buried in a shallow grave. Mr. Herbert had violated her and then murdered her. He buried her beneath the old church floor. Apparently, he was wanted in other places as well. The police said he had a list of young girls he was going to kill or had killed. He marked them out after each death. The police say that he had my photo and my name in a list. I was after Henrietta on the list, and apparently he was going to kill me next at some point. They ended up giving him life with no parole, and he's currently still incarcerated. Every time I think about what happened, I get the chills because it could have been me next. This is an oddly disgusting story. Last week, I had to catch the bus to and from work as my car was in the shop. On Thursday night, it was about 8:30 when I got to the bus stop. Sitting there was a lady mid-20s sitting in the shelter, and a guy maybe about early 30s sitting on a couple of steps behind the bus stop shelter. I stood against the wall waiting for my bus. It was the second bus scheduled to stop there. As I waited, I noticed the guy look up at the woman whenever she would look down at her phone like he was nervous she would see him. The woman had a bottle of water next to her. As the first bus approached, she dropped the bottle of water in the bin, and the bottle was probably a mouthful of water at the bottom. As I watched her sit down and the bus drove away, I noticed the guy got up and was looking in the bin. After 5 or so minutes, he reached his arm into the bin and pulled out the bottle of water. He then ran over to a car parked across the road but south of the bus stop. I could see him in his car as it was facing towards the bus shelter. I couldn't help but wonder what he was doing with the bottle. I would look up slightly every so often, and on the fourth time, I could see in the light of his car, I saw that he was sniffing the water in the bottle, and then, the part that made me feel ill, he licked the rim of the bottle, like he replaced the lid and placed it on the seat next to him. As he drove past, we locked eyes, and he looked as if though he hit the jackpot. I felt sick in the bottom of my gut, as if though I'd just witnessed a crime, but with no real victim. I never saw either one of them ever again. When I was in 5th grade, our washing machine broke. That really sucked for my mom because she had to haul 2 kids to the laundromat every weekend till the landlord got us a new one. It also really sucked for me because of what I had to endure every time. There was always this one man there, older and scruffy. I don't know why he was always at this laundromat. I don't recall him doing much laundry. He would just chat with my mom and us, and whenever my mom was out of earshot, he would whisper vile, awful things into my ear. My mom would usually give me a few dollars to go next door to the grocery store and get a magazine, Cosmo Girl or something like that. My memories of those days in that laundromat are of sitting there, staring at my magazine, trying to burn a hole with my eyes in it as I attempted to block out what he would tell me. He told me what he would do to my body in graphic detail, what it would taste like, what I could do to him, again in graphic detail, naming every body part in the most vulgar terms imaginable. How much he wished that we could do these things. He said that he had a daughter, and he would describe what we could do to each other. After one such day, on the car ride home, I was just feeling so gross and dirty and embarrassed, and all I could work up the courage to tell my mom was, "So-and-so's weird." She immediately scolded me for being rude, and said that he was a nice guy or something like that. And that was the end of that. There was one day that she asked him to keep an eye on my sister and I while she ran to the Dunkin' Donuts next door. I was nearly in tears pleading with her not to leave us, but to let us come with her, but she just brushed us off and went. Luckily nothing did happen, but I sure was in fight or flight mode, terrified till she got back. I don't talk about this to hardly anyone because it's so upsetting, but I want people to know that with a scared, humiliated kid without the right words to explain what's happening, "So-and-so's weird" might be all you get. Don't brush your kids off and don't trust friendly strangers. I still won't go into a laundromat to this day. Okay, so this is long, but there's a lot of info. So my mom is newly widowed since October and had been with my dad for over 48 years. She still looks great, is classy, and has always been faithful to my dad, and because of this, has always had a line of guys interested in her, including this one. I'll call him Todd. Todd has known her and my dad for years through a local watering hole they all went to. Not together, and were friendly from there. He finds out my dad passed recently. So a month ago, Todd starts showing up to my mom's work. She works at a local store as a cake decorator. He initially comes in and talks to her, which isn't out of the ordinary. She has many customers who come talk to her regularly, but this time, Todd says some things that let us know that he's been looking for info about her online. He first says, "You're 65. And she says, yeah, kind of confused why he's saying it. He then says, "You were born on such and such date," and she says, "Yeah," still confused. Then he says her phone number. From then on, he began contacting her, and a lot. She didn't think much of it at first, even though those are major red flags in my opinion. Todd starts coming to her work more regularly, calling and saying, not asking, to come over too. She would say no, but he would still show up and be super pushy about things. When he would show up, she would let him in, but say fine, but you can only stay a half hour, etc. He would come in, they would talk and sometimes have a drink, and she would tell him it's time to leave. Now, this continues for a few weeks, and then I come to visit. My mom hadn't even told me about him before this. Then she comes home from work one day and is noticeably worked up. She says she has a friend coming over and it's a guy. I laugh and say, "Mom, it's fine." I know my dad would have been okay with it and wouldn't have wanted her to wait. He would want her to find someone and be happy. She says they aren't dating or anything, but warns me that the guy often acts like they're a couple, even though they are not. So Todd comes over, and sure enough, he does just that. I'm confused initially, and by the way he is acting, it seems like they've been dating for a few months, and I'm wondering if my mom was just afraid to tell me. She is acting weird, but I can't quite put my finger on it. She keeps saying in front of him that he acts like they're a couple, even though they aren't. He just laughs it off and tries to grab her hand or put his hand on her leg. Then she goes into another room and he tells me how nervous he was to meet me. He starts crying, and I think for a moment that he's going to ask if it's okay to propose because he's so serious and going on and on about how much she means to him. He tells me that my mom was sobbing to him as he hugged her and that she just sank into him. It was incredibly creepy. Of course, she was going to be sobbing because her husband of 48 years just passed away, and my dad adored her. He also makes some alarming comments like saying my mom spends too much money. She doesn't, and really hasn't had a whole lot of her life, but she is better off financially than when my dad was here because of a few different things. My parents only recently, as within the last 5 years, purchased their first house. He also tells her privately that she is not allowed to go out with my daughter and I that weekend. I find this out later. Needless to say, I'm not feeling good about him, and I'm lost at this point, and I'm fuming because I don't know when all this took place. I also need to add that Todd used to work with my husband. I wouldn't have even have known, as I didn't initially recognize the name, but my mom mentioned it to me. So I call to ask him about the guy, not even telling him why at first, and he instantly tells me he is a snake in the grass, untrustworthy, manipulative, and vindictive. He goes on to tell me the guy was fired for stealing company time and reminds me that he had told me about him before. About 15 years ago, Todd told my husband at work that Todd would be married to my mom if it wasn't for my dad. I then remembered the conversation and about how we all laughed about it and joked about it back then. I'm also very concerned at this point because I realized that he had had this obsession with her for over 15 years now. So I don't address it with my mom that night because I want to collect my thoughts and don't want to hurt her feelings. The next day, she has a hair appointment and Todd had heard us talking about it. I come back from the store and Todd's vehicle is in the driveway. I'm not happy at all about it. I go in and he's there talking and standing with her in the kitchen. She tells me right away that he just stopped to see her hair real quick. I find out later that he just showed up without calling. He also kept asking questions and seemed a little too interested in our St. Patrick's Day plans that first night. We were going to meet up with my grandpa and go out for a bit as we were Irish and it's a big deal for our family. I could see that he was taking mental notes of what we were saying when we talked about it, so it wasn't surprising when he brought it up the next day at my mom's. I made it a point to barely say anything and he left a few minutes later. He leaves and I tell my mom right away that he is not effing coming with us the next day. She immediately says okay and that she doesn't even really like him that much, so she's fine with it, to my relief. Then he knocks at the door again and walks in and says that he left his phone there. My mom says he couldn't have left it anywhere but the kitchen because they didn't even go anywhere else in the house, but he makes a weird point of saying that it must be on the couch when they were in there, and sure enough, it's there. Even though my mom swears that they didn't go in there, but they are right next to each other and he could have easily just set it in there real quick while talking to her. I almost felt as if though he was listening outside, but I can't be sure. So he leaves, and I explained to her what my husband said. My husband was very concerned, to the point that he said that we needed to contact her work because Todd would try to get her fired as well as contact the police and let the neighbors know. I'm very concerned for her safety at this point. She trusts my husband with her life, so she takes it very seriously and says okay. She goes on to tell me that She had only been talking to him for a few weeks, and then he kept stopping by even though she would tell him not to. She did kind of like him, I guess, but wasn't really invested or anything like that, and I think honestly just liked having someone to talk to. She tells me that he was going through a divorce, but they hadn't finalized it because he was still on her insurance. I get that, but he tells her that he just went to a lawyer to finally get it done. She tells him, well, I hope that isn't because of me or anything. And he tells her, well, I had already paid the $5,000 to the lawyer and makes her feel obligated to him. I also find out from my uncle that he had a run-in with him. The very first week they were talking, Todd got my mom some tires for her car. She paid for them, he just picked them up. He drops them off and my uncle is shoveling the snow in her driveway. Todd comes up and doesn't even say hi or ask him who he is, but just says, "How old are you?" in some weird way. My uncle tells him and then explains how he's related. Todd doesn't respond and walks off into the house. When he comes back out, my uncle says, "Thanks again for doing that for her. We really appreciate it." Todd doesn't even acknowledge him and just gives him dirty looks like he's jealous or something. I also find out that Todd told my mom some ridiculous story about my dad offering to do drugs with him at the bar, knowing my mom is against that kind of thing and she obviously can't question my dad. It's like he's competitive with my dad, who isn't even here, and it infuriates me that he would badmouth him and say something that I know isn't true. So that brings us to St. Patrick's Day. Todd shows up to her work again and just says, "Give me your keys, I'm gonna go wash your car." My mom says, "No, you can't take my car." And he's never even drove it before. He's just this pushy and presumptuous. She tells him he can't go with that night. He can't come over anymore and can't call. And she goes on to explain that we don't think he is good for her, that my husband is concerned and that she wholeheartedly trusts him so that he is not to contact her anymore. She calls to tell me this, and while I'm on the phone with her, I start hearing someone pounding at her door. It's him, I find out, but I don't answer. I'm not sure how it's even possible to get there that fast. He knocks for 15 minutes and then leaves a note in the door for me to call him. I don't call but text and tell him I got the note, but I don't feel that we need to have a phone conversation about anything. I tell him my mom explained the situation already. She doesn't want to see him anymore, and he needs to respect that. He responds saying that he deserves to know who said that. I tell him that's not necessary, and we would have felt the same based on our interaction with him. I failed to mention earlier my daughter was also there when we met and realized she knew him. She was the main bartender for a year at that bar that he frequents, and she hated him. He constantly tried to tell her how to do her job. When he met her, he tried acting like he didn't know her at first. He pleads with me to speak to him on the phone, and I say it's not a back and forth discussion, and he needs to respect that. He then goes on and says that he thinks it's all BS, and that no one said anything at all. I tell him that I'll do everything in my power to make sure he stays away at this point, and that we've notified her work, neighbors, and the police, and he continues to call that night. We've not heard from him since then directly, but he sent a mutual friend to my mom's work to let her know that Todd said he won't bother her anymore, but that if she wanted to call him in a few weeks after everyone settled down, that she could. This worries me that he's still holding out hope. It also worries me about what will happen tomorrow when I leave. Two days ago, I, a 38-year-old female, took delivery of a new fridge delivered to my rental unit in the lower mainland of British Columbia. I was home alone, as my partner, a 32-year-old male, was still at work. Two delivery guys show up, and one, a regular guy that we'll call RG, stayed outside while the other, complete creep, or CC, came in to measure the doorways. My doors are narrow, so it took some maneuvering to get the fridges in and out of the house, respectively. While CC is measuring the various apertures of the house, I noticed that he was pinching himself through the front of his pants, like he had an itch. So long story short, the fridges switched places in my kitchen, and I was left alone with CC in my kitchen while RG loaded up the old one for disposal. At this point, CC starts drawing more attention to his groin and says that he's having a problem with his junk. There was a language barrier, so I assumed he had somehow hit himself during the fridge swap. Turns out, he was just fully aroused and walking around with tent pants while he was finishing up the install. I am now officially extremely uncomfortable, and I tend to laugh when faced with situations that make me this uncomfortable. Paraphrasing the conversation that followed due to the language barrier between myself and CC. I say, "Are you okay? Did you get hit?" "Not hit, just uncomfortable." And I note the obvious boner at this point, as I'd been trying not to look down as soon as he started pinching himself. I start uncomfortably laughing. "I'm going to need some help with this, I think," referencing to the obvious. Now me, extra uncomfortable laughter. "Well, it looks like you'll have to deal with that elsewhere." "Oh, I'd not do it here." Turns away from me and is obviously touching himself. Thanks for the delivery. It looks like we're all done here." Maybe you could help." No, I'm at the point of intense, uncomfortable laughter. Nah, man." Now he's meandering towards the door slowly and seemingly reluctantly. "Okay, things are getting weird." "Things are getting weird? This is weird," I yelled. At which point, this complete creep leaves my house and I immediately lock the door. I told my landlord what happened and he was honestly aghast, and followed up with the delivery company the next day. After reflection on what happened and how disturbing that behavior was, I've decided to go to the RCMP to report what happened tomorrow. This guy knows where I live, but I can't stand by yet again while some creep gets away with this kind of thing. Also, who knows how many other people have dealt with a similar behavior from this dude? Is it going too far to light up the business on Google, Facebook, etc. with reviews about their pervert delivery people? My daughter was about 8 or 9 at the time. We'll call her D for daughter. My mom loved taking her to this local amusement park where we live, and it has rides, rock climbing walls, etc., etc. On this particular day, Dee was climbing all the walls, and she would hit the bell on the first try at the top, climb down, and go to do a more difficult section. That's when my mom noticed. A couple in their 30s or 40s whispering to each other and staring very intently at Dee. So my mom told Dee that they were going somewhere different and moved to another section of the park. Not more than 5 minutes later, there they were again, staring at Dee and whispering to each other. They left again only to see the couple again getting closer to Dee. At that point, my mom was becoming paranoid and decided to leave, and that's when they approached them both. They were trying to talk to Dee, and luckily my mom has an instinct with creepy people and snagged Dee up and put her behind her, and this is what she told them. "What business do you have talking to an 8-year-old, you weird perverts? You didn't think I'd seen you following us around the park, staring at my granddaughter, whispering to each other? I'm calling the police." At that point, they left in an absolute hurry, didn't even bother to give an explanation for their actions. I just want to thank my mom, who knew what their intentions were. But I'm glad we never got to find out, and I'm glad to have such an observant mother, especially in a situation like that. Now that I'm safe at home, I'm beginning to process what happened, and I don't know if I'll be able to sleep. I, a 25-year-old female, had friends from out of state come into town for the weekend, and we decided to go downtown for drinks. I drove separately because they were coming from an Airbnb. Around 2 a.m. we decided to leave, and my car was parked in the garage a block over from where my friends parked. I say my goodbyes and begin the short walk to the garage. As soon as I hit the corner, 2 large men began walking behind me. I try to subtly put space between us. They suddenly whistle loudly and shout, but I don't see anybody ahead. I don't acknowledge, but start walking faster. I pass an alley to my left, and there's another guy walking out of it towards me. At this point, I'm no longer subtly walking fast. I make it into the garage, and I park by the entrance, so I quickly slip into my car and lock the doors. I turn around to look behind me and see the guys that were following me stop at the entrance of the garage and watch my car. They talk for a minute before they spread out and stand across the entrance, blocking the exit. I don't move. I keep watching until other vehicles start coming in, forcing them to move, and I take the opportunity to quickly pull out and floor it out of there. I could be paranoid, but my instincts were telling me something was up as soon as I saw them initially, and now I can't sleep. This happened last night, and I'm still rattled. My wife and I went to Target last night to pick up some tea and soups because she had a bad head cold and couldn't stand eating anything hard. She stayed in the car, and I went in to grab what she liked and needed to make her feel better. I walked in and grabbed a water from Starbucks and turned to grab a handheld basket. At the same time, I didn't notice a man in Starbucks watching me. As I walked through the aisles looking for anything else to make her feel better or happy, I noticed him fall into step beside me. Now, coming from a southern background, I simply smiled and kept a subtle eye on him. He kept trying to talk to me, asking how I was, if I had a boyfriend, if he could have my number, etc. I cut my answers short and unmistakably uninterested in his company. I informed him that I was married and held up my wedding ring for him to see. He got huffy and again asked if he could have my number. I said no and to leave me alone. He starts getting aggressive and making disgusting comments about things he'd do if we got together in bed. And then he grabs my arm and tries to turn me around to face him. I don't take kindly to people touching me without my consent, and slapped him, loudly telling him to F off and that he has no right to touch me. An employee comes running over and asks if I'm all right. The guy immediately tries to say that I'm his girlfriend and that I was overreacting to an argument that we were having. I scream at him that again, I'm married, and he's a complete stranger to me. He tries to argue and then hurries out to the parking lot when the employee asks the manager to call the cops. The employee and the manager walk me to the car and stay while the cops arrive to take the video footage, which clearly shows the guy stalking me from the Starbucks around the store, and my statement. I had to reassure my wife I was okay, and that I'd keep an eye out for him next time we were at Target. For God's sakes, people, no means no. This happened literally about 30 minutes ago. I'm a 15-year-old female, short and petite size. I live in Florida, so it was raining all morning today and I decided to go on a run in the evening. It was a regular run. I don't like to run in my neighborhood just because there's too many turns and it messes me up at times. I'm on the side of the highway on the sidewalk where usually bikers and people walking their dogs are. There's a fire station close to me and I feel relatively safe most of the time. I carry pepper spray and always have my phone on me. I stopped at the 2-mile point and turned around and started walking, texting my mom where I was and then I'm coming home, changing the music, etc. I noticed a golf cart stopped ahead of me that I had run by before that same day. I recognized it by the smell of weed coming from it, and occupying it was an old man who I was earlier not paying attention to because there was a golf course right there where usually old people go to golf. I already get a bad feeling being a teenage girl and having something like this happen before. I walk past it and he tries to say something to me. I completely ignore it and just start sprinting away. I turn my head back and the headlights are on, and this man is following me in his golf cart. I'm starting to freak out at this point, so I call my mom and I'm crying while actually running for my life. I see a group of old people in a golf cart going into a neighborhood, so I flag them down for help and get into their cart. At this point, the guy following me is right there and continues literally following the people that I'm with trying to get to me. My mom is livid by this point and thinks the people who literally saved me are the ones that are trying to kidnap me. She eventually gets there and figures out that they helped me instead of kidnapping me. I know the story is nothing serious, and I'm thankful that nothing bad happened to me, but I keep thinking what would have happened if those people weren't there and he was able to catch up. I could never outrun a golf cart, and there was nothing but random neighborhoods around me. I gotta get this off my chest. For context, it was probably after 2 a.m. I was in a WhatsApp call with my girlfriend, and we were talking like normal. Soon her voice cut off from the call, and I started hearing a child I assumed a little boy. He was talking, or more like babbling, like babies do. My girlfriend has a younger brother. He's about 13, so it couldn't have been him. She didn't have any family in her room with her. And this was quite odd because it sounded like whatever it was pretty close to the mic. I said, "Jess, who is that? Jess?" Then as suddenly as it started, it ended and an eerie silence took over the call. "Jess?" I asked again. Jess responded, "What?" And I asked her, Are you alone?" She responded, "Yeah, why?" I just told her, nothing, just curious. And I left it at that. A couple of months passed and the strange interference happened again. I'm sure it happened after 12 a.m. And this time the call with my girlfriend got interrupted and got really staticky conversation between two ladies coming through. It was too staticky. I could just make out a couple of words, and I said, "Excuse me," like at least 5 times, and "hello," and I got no response or reaction. When silence filled the call once more, I called out for my girlfriend and asked, "Did you hear that?" She said, "No, what did you hear?" I told her what I heard, and she just stayed silent. I calmed her down by saying, maybe someone tapped into our call, or my phone intercepted another call, I don't know. I'm not sure what it is. Trying to reason it made me even more uneasy. Thinking about a thing tapping onto our call was really creepy. Imagining that it was a creep hacking my cell phone connection was honestly worse. Some months after it happened, this time, it was worse. It happened during the early hours of the morning. The call got interrupted, and I heard on the other end this chillingly high-pitched and fast laughter. It slowed down and lowered the pitch until it was the deepest laugh I'd ever heard. It shook me to my core. The laughter stopped, and it started crying hysterically, and after a few seconds of wailing, it stopped. I immediately told my girlfriend, and she got really scared this time, and I told her to forget it and just to go to bed. I never forgot about these 3 incidents. It still freaks me out. I fear calling my girlfriend because of the interferences. If someone can explain this or has had similar experiences, please share in the comments. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. I release new videos every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/Let'sReadOfficial, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations and bonus content over on Patreon, or click that big join button to hear about the extra perks offered for the channel. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all of these stories in big compilations and save huge on data located anywhere you listen to podcasts. Links in the description below. Thanks so much, friends. And remember, the multiverse is a lie.